Okay. Okay, Adrian, we're recording now, so if you could get started, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. It seems like only yesterday. Just a word of caution before we start. In discussion of this sort of topic, it is quite common to want to use real concrete examples that you have run into in the past. Do be ever so careful while we're being recorded. Okay, so I did an agenda slide, which is just a set of questions that drove me to put together the material, and I don't think we need to talk about the agenda. So why are we talking about this topic? Well, it's pretty key to the way working groups run smoothly, and you as chairs are responsible then for maintaining the participation and getting as much technical input from every source you can lay your hands on, and also for making sure that wrong ideas don't actually get to dominate the discussions. On top of that, it can be not very nice working in an unpleasant environment, so it's a good idea to try to make the working groups operate in a cool way, and to try to cut out any incivility. And make no mistake, this stuff does happen. It's a feature of normal human interactions. So since we have a duty of care to the others we work with, we need to look at ways to make everybody play nicely. The last reason we're talking about this is that you specifically, the working group chair, specifically asked the ADs for a session on this topic. So what is uncivil behavior? Well, it's really hard to come up with a precise definition, and I know that a lot of us as engineers would prefer to see a precise definition, but well, tough. There are some tests you can apply to help you decide what is civil, and they're sort of usual tests. Would you like it if it was done to you? Would you do it to someone else? How would you feel if you saw or heard about it being done to somebody you care about? Does it violate social norms like a prejudice or harassment? Is it rude? Is it bad taste? And quite an important one, I think, is how would a newcomer, somebody who's just signed up to the mailing list, who's watching from the edge, how would they react if they saw it? Would it discourage them? Would it cause them to unsubscribe and go away?
You know, Adrian, though, there's some banter, there's some banter that goes on between people that know each other that I hope we wouldn't get to the sensitivity level where this is discouraged.
I think you're right, and I come to this a little later, but you've got to be very careful, okay? If I'm talking with Adrian Farrel, as I was wont to do, and he called me a stupid fucker, that would be normal banter between me and him.
Exactly.
I don't know that is actually really it's not the worst crime in the world, but I don't know that that's particularly good behaviour on a public mailing list.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I mean there were just little. I mean, especially when Dave Ward was ISIS chair and I was OSPS chair. Or has there ever been another chair? Anyway, we'd go back and forth with the protocol sometimes, and I wouldn't go into somebody else's working group and do the same thing, to somebody, cold, but. And I'm sure he wouldn't either, but it was just, and it's somewhat, I just hope we wouldn't get to the point where we lose that.
Right, and I think that's what I mean by, I know it when I see it, and there being no fixed and formal rules. And certainly we are not trying to create some police state here where you go out and bash people every time they do anything other than right. Excuse me, my good sir, but I'd like to take issue with a point that you raised, if that wouldn't offend you. So there are lines, and it's all about behavior rather than rigorous rules. Okay, so how might or where might people engage in undesirable behaviors? Well, there are plenty of opportunities. But this is largely about interpersonal communication. So you might see it at the mic in a face-to-face or a virtual meeting. You might see it in a Jabber room, although that seems to be, apart from one specific room in the IETF, that seems to not happen. And you'll often see it in mailing lists. My contention is that the venue and the medium isn't important, although that can affect how it's heard and how aggressive and impolite it is. And then there's a bunch of things that I think are out of scope for us. And these are all the private interactions. So if AC sends Dave Ward a private email that calls in something rude, well, that's not something that we can ask the chairs to act on. And private conversations in corridors are out of scope. You might want to think that harassment, and we have ways of dealing with harassment, but it's not something that the chairs need to be jumping on. So, as I said before, we're not trying to turn this into a police force, and you'll often find yourself saying, "No, I'm not really sure whether this counts as uncivil," but it kind of, I noticed it. So don't go hunting out bad cases, but do try to be alert to things that are going on, in particular on the mailing list. And very definitely, if somebody comes to you and says that they're feeling hurt or squashed or somebody's being rude to them, then do listen carefully and go and look into it. It can be, I think, a bit embarrassing to have to deal with this. So try to step back from that and treat it as part of your job, part of your duty, and get on with it as maybe something slightly distasteful, but something you have to do. A little bit like parenting, or maybe parenting somebody else's children. It's not police work, but it's a responsibility you have. And here's again a close line that AC sort of raised there. We don't want to have cliques and favoritism or special cases or mitigating circumstances. If somebody does something that's not civil, then just correct them. So how do we correct them? The important thing, in my view, is this is not about punishment. This is not saying you called somebody a rude word on the mailing list and therefore we are going to slap you. The main result we're looking for is stop it. Get it to not happen again. The next most important thing is to repair any damage that's been caused. And that's essentially get the person to apologize, get the working relationship back onto an even keel, and get everybody going. And that last thing cuts into show the community that it's not acceptable. Make it a better working environment for everybody. So there are some things that you might need to do to achieve that some people would call punishment. Those are public censure or suspending mailing list privileges, which I'll talk about later. But these are really about results 1 and 3. So you don't suspend somebody's mailing list privileges as a punishment, but you may need to do it to stop it happening again. So understand as you do this that people may feel punished when you correct them. And indeed, any of you who've experienced 2-year-old children will know that when you tell them off for doing something they shouldn't have done, they feel punished, even if you're saying, no, that's not acceptable, don't do it again. So you need to be sensitive to how people will feel, but nevertheless, you have to apply some kind of process to stop it happening and make sure it doesn't happen again. So I think the first line of defense you get from your anguished 2-year-old is some form of excuse. Something like, I didn't mean to be rude, or he was being a pain and deserved it, or I wasn't being rude, she's just being oversensitive, I was provoked, it was only a joke. There will be an infinite number of excuses. Often you'll hear the excuse really early, even before you've had a chance to tell somebody that wasn't acceptable. They know they did something a bit naughty and they'll come in with the excuse. And frankly, often you have, as an individual, you have no sympathy at all with the person who's been the victim of the lack of civility. There are a lot of people around who are truly royal pains, and sometimes comments made are very funny. And more than often, you know the person very well and you're perfectly familiar with their way of behaving and the type of comments they make. But still, what they've done is behave in an uncivil way. What else? Well, we're unfortunate. We're coming at this discussion in an environment where people are already acting. It's not like we have a green field, and there are a number of characters who have been getting away with it for years, and now you're possibly going to go and say to them for the first time, that's not acceptable. Well, none of this matters. We're trying to make things better. We're trying to stop uncivil behavior and get people to talk to each other and make it a better environment for our work. So who acts and when do they do it? So it's a community. It's a community. We should all act. If any of us sees anything bad, whether we're a chair or an AD or just an individual, we really ought to stop the old lady being mugged on the street corner. We have a duty. But we have to be careful. Anarchy is a delicate balance. We don't particularly want mob rule. And working group chairs do have a duty to make their working groups work well. So everything, all human interactions, all childcare, all management relationships come down to dog training. And there's a lesson in dog training, which is that you can only correct the dog's behavior immediately after an event. It is no good coming along 2 days later and telling your dog off for doing something. It doesn't associate what it did with the punishment. And so it's important to not leave the situation unrectified. If you're not careful, the offender, who knows what they've done, becomes more invested in excuses and not being corrected. There's also a risk that others will pile in and it will develop into a flame war or retaliation. And similarly, the hurt person becomes more upset because nobody's defended them. And lastly, your working group becomes confused and distracted and stops doing technical work. So you don't need an instant response because actually we're not dogs, but you should be prompt. Curiously, this means you need to pay attention in your working group meetings and not put your feet up and doze at the microphone. And you need to read your mailing list from time to time. I don't think you have to be watching every email. I think it's fine if you set aside a bit of time every couple of days to go and look at your mailing list. And there are typically more than one chair per working group, so you could even take it in turns and have a little rota. And then when you come to respond, you need to have a little coordination. It's not typically very good if both of the chairs pile in independently and shout. So if you can coordinate first or either in advance to know who has the responsibility, who is the father and who's the mother, or you can do it event by event by communicating at the time. But try not to let this introduce a week or two of delay, because that makes things more difficult. Right, now we come to the meat. What actually should you do? I think you need to try to understand what it is you want to achieve before you do anything. So I think things get put right. Ideally, if the offender says, "Oh, sorry, I went a bit over the top there. I didn't mean to be rude. Please take my apology and let's move on." So what you're trying to do here is get the offender to do that, and then everything will be smooth. Exactly what you do depends on the immediacy and what medium they used to be rude. Mailing lists are different from microphones, and I think if something happens in a working group meeting, ideally you catch it at once. If it happens on a mailing list, you have a bit of time. Your bottom line, obviously, is to be polite yourself. So, microphone comments. It can be a little adrenaline fueled. You hear somebody say something rude and immediately you're buzzing because you've got to jump in. Call stop, breathe yourself, get yourself calm, and then make some little comment. I've supplied some suggested text here. This is not something you have to print out, laminate, and carry with you. But it's kind of guidance on what you need to say. Always make the assumption that the person who spoke didn't mean to be rude. Give them that opening, but then tell them how it was heard and tell them what you want them to do. And what you want them to do is apologize, but go on talking about the technical work. If you don't catch it at the time, maybe you didn't hear it, maybe you didn't notice it was rude, maybe you fumble it, then move on and treat it like email, as if the comment had been made in email. So, mailing lists. On mailing lists, there will often be a time lag. But be aware that some people will play on this. In particular, they'll come back and say, a week later, well, nobody objected, so it can't have been a bad thing. Be aware that the longer you leave it, the more painful it is for you to deal with it. So I recommend a series of steps. And the more severe something is, the further down the sequence you might want to enter the whole process. So if somebody is massively offensive, go straight in later down. But largely speaking, if you can talk to the person in private and get them to correct their behavior, then everything is good. It's not there's no public reprimand. It's just them apparently fixing it themselves, and they save as much face as possible. If you can't reach them, or they're not responsive to your request for them to handle it themselves, then you still need to do something. And I think what you have to do is ask them in public to take that action. So you go to the mailing list and send something like my suggested text there to let them know that they will not be allowed to get away with it. And that's the public correction then that you come to, which is, I saw this happen, it's not acceptable, and I'm calling on him to apologize so that we can move on. So anywhere along this sequence of steps, the offender may choose to understand that they need to apologize and fix the problem. But it's also possible that they will be some way recalcitrant or just refuse. So I think actually people fall into two categories: those who immediately say, "Yeah, that was too much," and they either understand that they have to apologize, or they understand that they really did do something wrong. And either way, they get the apology out of the way and they move on. But the second group, the deniers and the excusers and the wrigglers, I think is the larger group, and they resist. So sometimes you can handle this in the private email exchanges by saying that you understand that they didn't mean to, but they still need to apologize. And that's perhaps going to be enough. Maybe you can move some of the people from the second group into the first group and everything's fine. Other times you have to go a bit further. So there are some bigger sticks that you can use. I prefer the threat of a stick to actually using the stick, in the knowledge that you can only execute somebody once. But as you progress through the threat, it's really good to make it very clear what might be going to happen, what sticks you've got and how you plan to use them. So the aim is to get people back onto the softer approach. The way to do it is by explaining the sequence of events rather than threatening the sequence of events. So it's much better to say, when you don't apologize, I have to go on and do these things, rather than saying, if you don't apologize, then I will hit you. At the same time as you do this, it's a good idea to just let them know that there is an appeal path. So just say, and if you're not happy, the way to handle this is to take your concerns to the area director. So your first big stick, I suppose it's a smaller stick than the biggest of big sticks, is public censure. So you can warn the offender, listen, if you don't apologize, then because I have to make sure the working group runs well, I'm going to have to send a mail to the mailing list explaining how I think your behavior was unacceptable. And it's probably not a bad idea to have previously drafted this email so that you can send it to the offender and say, this is the mail I'm going to send. Because when they see it, they might prefer to apologize themselves. If the offence is really bad, or you feel that the offender is compounding things, or things escalate, then we have the option of suspending somebody's posting rights. This is a bit of IETF process that formally allows us to ban people from posting. We can't ban, and we don't ban people from receiving on mailing lists, but if somebody is a disruptive influence on your working group, you can stop them posting. So this is called a PR action, a posting rights action, and is based on BCP 83. And BCP 83 says that you as a working group chair, or in fact anybody, but basically it's for working group chairs, writes it up, gets an AD to run with it, just like when you want an internet draft to go to RFC. That goes then with the AD to the IESG, who issue an IETF last call and then ban somebody for 12 months. And yeah, that is quite a lot of process. 3683 is heavy, and really, who wants to run with that? And in fact, in the history of the IETF, it's only been done a half dozen times for people who are absolutely swamping mailing lists and refuse to shut up. So recognizing that, RFC 3938 was put together, and this appears to be two different BCPs at the same time, so easier to look at the RFC. 3938 gives you as working group chairs explicit responsibility for managing your mailing list, and it gives you the authority to temporarily suspend an individual from a mailing list. The intention is that it's as a last resort, after you've tried various mechanisms to get them to behave, and in consultation with your AD. So you don't have to go it alone, talk to your AD about it, pursue the previously discussed ways of talking to an offender. And then, if all else fails, you can, and you have the admin on your mailing list, you can suspend somebody's posting rights for 30 days, tell the mailing list and the individual you've done it and why, remind them that they can appeal your action to your AD. So it doesn't go through the full formal appeals process. It would be appealed by the individual concerned, going to the AD and saying, it's not fair. Even if you, yeah, go on.
Sorry to interrupt. There is one additional option which is halfway between, which is simply to moderate the individual. In my prior experience, a lot of the flame wars that happen on mailing lists can be simply damped out by just making the mails slow down. You don't necessarily throw them away. You just make them take an extra day or two to show up.
Yeah, that's very good, Jeff, because it also adds the opportunity for you to go to the individual and say, hey, you were just trying to post this email. Do you want to tone it down a bit? Yeah, good catch, good call. And yeah, a reminder there, you do not need any special process to moderate. You can just turn on, set the flag in Mailman saying moderate this individual, You'll get an email when they try to post, and you can go in and read and either post or delay or whatever. Be a little careful if there's a heated technical debate that you're not accused of delaying one person specifically. Okay, serial offenders and recidivists. So often you'll see a pattern of behavior. You may get even a pattern of somebody who's rude, apologizes, then they're rude again, and they apologize again, and they keep going, and they promise they'll never do it again, but they can't resist. It can be habitual. It can be because they're just not a very nice person, or because actually becoming the class jester is a great way to get attention and personal reward. If somebody keeps on doing this stuff, then this is more significant. You have to gradually crank up how you deal with them. And you can explain to them what they're doing and why it's a problem. You can enter the process further down the sequence. You may, as Jeff says, turn on moderation. And you may need to look toward actual posting right bans. So what are you thinking as all this happens? Well, you may be thinking, he's a really valuable contributor. I don't want to ban him. Or she'll be really upset. She cares about people, so I can't tell her she was rude because she'll die. Or you might be yourself afraid that you'll get personal attacks, and it may be embarrassing, and you might have real technical work to do, and this is quite a bore to deal with. But it's your job. It's why you get paid big bucks. So if any of this stuff is bothering you, if you've got some kind of tension or contradiction running in your head, talk to your AD. It's part of how they should be helping you learn about being the working group chair, and it's their job. So they are happy to help. The good news is that the buck does not stop with you. In the first instance, the AD is responsible for all of your actions and your inactions. Their job is to make you a better chair and to give you the tools to do it and to discuss problems and resolutions. They are the appeal, the immediate appeal, if you do something, if you overact or if you underact. So if you screw up, the AD is responsible. The AD carries the can. It's the AD who can be recalled or appealed or taken out into the car park and beaten up. But that also means that the AD is going to have expectations about what you do. So try to make your AD happy. Beware that if you don't like your AD, then your screwing up is a good way to get the AD into trouble. Harassment. So I think uncivil behavior may sometimes move towards or actually be harassment. And so you need to be aware of that. I don't think it stops you from your response, the way you handle it in the mailing list, but you may want to do something additional. And that's described in the anti-harassment draft, which hopefully will become an RFC one day when the IETF chair actually pulls his finger out. It creates a formal process for reporting things that you think are harassment. And in any case, there's an ombudsperson who turns up to IETF meetings and has an email address who is really happy to discuss things that worry you. Even things that you don't think are harassment. You know, even if you think somebody's just being plain rude, you can talk to the ombudsperson and she will discuss with you ways of dealing with it, and she may say, yeah, you've got processes, you can just get on with it. Or she may say, you know what, this is really bad, and I know what to do about this, I'll deal with it. Which takes me, I haven't been watching the clock, to the end of my slides, and I guess the ADs want to run a bit of recorded discussion first and then go private.
Exactly. If anyone has questions or comments they'd like to make now while we're still recording, I appreciate that. And then once the conversation dries up, I'll go to unrecorded. So talk away. Someone who was a call-in user 5, actually they disappeared, never mind. Yeah, any questions, comments, feedback for us or Adrian?
I have one question. How much of a problem is this? I know that it is a real problem for the individuals that is being very, very rudely handled. But on overall, how big problem is it?
I think it's hard to judge. Oh, go on, you start.
As an example for my part, I've very seldom had issues with mailing lists. I have occasionally wished for a magic button to shut off the microphones.
Yeah, I can agree on that. But it's also like 4, 5, 6 years ago.
No, it's not, Loa. There's at least 3 working groups. There are at least 3 working groups where, there are 2 working groups where there are recurrent problems, and I will argue that there are more working groups than that which have sometimes issues. I haven't seen a vast amount of incivility on the routing area mailing lists. I have heard some emails, seen some emails in other areas that were extremely shocking in how over the top and inappropriate they were.
So I was going to say that there are problems in developing metrics for how bad this is. There are some individuals I know who are often snarky and impolite, and they tend, we who are long-termers in the IETF tend to see them and just say, oh, that's so-and-so, we can ignore that. What we don't know is what effect they're having on newcomers who are participating and newcomers who would like to participate. So you might look at some of the working groups that appear to be a little stale with either small membership or a very stable set of members who have been around for forever. And you might ask, well, why are we not seeing new blood? And is this one of the reasons?
Yeah, I would even come back to AC's comment before about, you know, certain people have pre-established relationships and they feel comfortable, you know, making what may be personal comments in exchanges, in technical exchanges. However, doing that, I think, makes it difficult for newcomers to say, oh, do I need to have this personal relationship already to engage in this conversation, or am I going to be sort of attacked if I start to engage in a conversation, in a technical conversation?
I think the relevant point from that one is that ad hominem attacks are never a good idea. But we do have some individuals, as their known set of personality quirks, either it can be perceived as making ad hominem attacks or just simply sound far more aggressive about their dislike of the idea than is really warranted.
And I guess one of the key points here is when this type of behavior happens, it silences the technical discussion. It silences and scares away people who might have extremely valid technical concerns and suggestions because they don't want to deal with it. Nobody enjoys being screamed at. Nobody enjoys being told that they're an idiot or that they've missed things. There's always more information any of us could know. So unless you're extremely self-confident, it's very hard to go up and have to deal with that. And if you see people doing that type of behavior to another person, it's extremely discouraging for participation. And good relationships, joking, these all have their place. But it needs to stay civil. And that's really the main point here.
And this is Deborah. I mean, we do this all the time on the mailing list. Often, people just criticize something, but they're not specific. You know, they just say some offhand remark. And you know, we've always, as chairs, everything we try to say, you have to be constructive and say something specifically, technically, that you have concerns on. You can't just say, you know, a flip mark on it. So I think, you know, it's what we've always been doing, and we just have to make sure we, you know, we keep watching for it.
That's almost a different thing. That's almost a different thing than being uncivil, though, Deborah. I mean, there's a lot of people that just by their nature, they're going to engage in a circular argument that they don't like something because they don't like it, just saying it different. Right? That's not necessarily uncivil. It's just something that slows the process down.
Yeah, I think you can see a spectrum here. Yeah, all the way from the wonderful comments of this won't work for the following reasons, and here's an example that shows it not working. Through
and that's what you want.
Yeah, right. And then you'll get the hey, this won't work. Well, which is, you know, not helpful but not offensive. And then you might have, that's a dumb idea, which is opinionated but not too bad. And then AC's really dumb. This is the 14th time he's come up with a crap idea on this mailing list, and it's time everybody stopped listening to him, which is, yeah, over the line.
Okay, unless there are more comments, I'm going to turn off the recording now. Does anyone have any other questions or comments they'd like to make publicly? Or not publicly, but recordedly? Okay,